We are so quick to oscillate between the machine is smarter than me, and at the same time, if I don't get what I want in 2 seconds, then it's garbage. Remove that duality. It's not a genius. It's not a complete failure. And this kind of
Mm-hmm.
simpler, more grounded approach is how you can create insanely awesome stuff.
Hello, I'm Ronit Novak, and this is The Grain. Welcome to Season 3. So I wanted our first episode this season to be kind of a reset button for creatives who are living through the AI whiplash, me included. So 2 years ago, most of us were happily making our work and ignoring those research papers. And then November 2022 happened. Remember, ChatGPT was released to the public. We were all so innocent back then. And then suddenly, generative AI wasn't a niche research topic anymore. It was a newsroom headline. It was stirring up an existential crisis. Today's guest has lived on both sides of that divide, and her new book is the clearest field guide I've read so far on how to think and create right now in the age of AI. Dr. Maya Ackerman is a world-renowned AI researcher and generative AI pioneer. She's co-founder and CEO of Wave AI, leading one of the earliest Gen AI startups. She's also a musician and artist in her own right. Maya joins me to talk about her new book, Creative Machines, AI, Art, and Us. It's out October 14th, and yes, you can pre-order. Maya has been studying AI and creativity in academia for more than a decade, and she's building creative tools that work for artists, not instead of them. Now, what I love about Maya's perspective is that it's not breathless boosterism, and it's also not a doom spiral. It's practical, it's human-centered, and despite some measured criticism, it's still hopeful that humanity always finds a way. Maya and I talk about what is creativity actually. Can animals be creative? And in turn, could robots be creative? And what are hallucinations anyway? How are they similar to human divergent thinking or to acid trips? Throughout our conversation, Maya and I keep circling back to the concept of agency, because that's what I'm really interested in when we're talking about machines and where a lot of developers do miss that mark. Season 3 of The Grain is all about balance, the pleasure and the peril. But it's also about practice. Who are we as creators? Why are we using these tools? And how do we use them in the smartest, most intentional ways? All right, let's get into it with Dr. Maya Ackerman, author of Creative Machines, AI, Art, and Us on The Grain. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Maya Ackerman, how are you today?
I'm doing super well. So great to be here.
This is going to be a really exciting podcast for a lot of creatives because the book that you wrote, Creative Machines, AI, Art, and Us, touches on so many important topics that creatives are thinking about, fighting about, internal battles, external battles, and also just a lot of good insight on what are we doing anyway? Like, what is creativity and what are we fighting so hard to protect? So, Maya, you've been studying AI and creativity for over 10 years in an academic setting. So, why the urgency now to write this book?
Well, it was fun to work on Gen AI with my friends and colleagues for a decade. And then, of course, several years ago, it became the hottest thing in the world. And I remember waking up every morning wondering, have I hallucinated my entire existence? How is this possible? And when something like this happens, you got to wonder, how can I help? How can I help people understand what's happening, make the best use of this moment, and most importantly, help take us to the right direction? Because a lot of the fighting that I'm seeing around this space is ineffective because we don't understand enough about what's going on. So I wanted to help share some of that insight.
Right. So you were researching kind of in the background. AI was not in anybody's consciousness until November 2022, right? When ChatGPT was launched. And then suddenly everybody realized that Gen AI was a thing. And then suddenly your research and everything that you had been quietly working away on became like in the news every day, just like a constant, and not just an interesting news story, but like a threat to humanity.
It's really wild. I remember it was November 2022, and I get an email from one of my investors talking about stability AI. This was before the release of ChatGPT, but just before. And he says, this is the hottest thing. What do you think? And I was like, oh, that doesn't seem like much because the CEO wasn't a technical person at all, and he was promising to do all of generative AI. So it was really interesting because within about a week, Stability AI raised $101 million on this thesis. And then the investment world woke up a little bit before the release of ChatGPT. So it showed me something really important about the way that the world works, how we consumers think that we are making the decisions. But really, there are much more powerful players playing in the background, manipulating sort of what gets the chance to go big.
Yeah, I found that was a really interesting through line in the book because you did break down what the timeline was towards where we are at now. And it's not factors like, oh, let's make humanity better or make creativity more accessible to people. It's let's make money, right? And let's compete with like some of our arch enemies like the Google and the Microsoft competition and and I think it's important for users of AI to realize what some of the intent is in the products that we have and the way that they're marketed too. So that leads me to my next question. Who is this book for?
The book is for people who are building, investors and entrepreneurs on the one hand, because in order to build effectively, you need to understand the technology and its potential. And its greatest potential is to enable humanity, to enable our intelligence to become bigger, right? And you see
Mhm.
that with the success of ChatGPT. That's the reason it's successful, but we can get more into that later. But on the other hand, it's for anybody who is using or ever thinks about using Gen AI and understanding what to do with that. Because when we understand what it's all about, we can find ways to use it in a way that elevates us, even if nobody designed it for that purpose.
Hmm. So that puts the power back in the creator's hands, back in the user's hands. Even though these tools were not meant to enhance creativity, how can we kind of hack the system so that we can use it for what we need it for?
It's one of the most amazing things watching human creativity be so high that even given a
Yeah.
tool that's not really entirely designed for that, we can always find a way. So, kind of the most obvious one to start from is ChatGPT, which is very flexible in the way that it can work with us. It can be like the cheat on my homework tool where I just type online, take whatever it does, right? Which unfortunately is a very common use case, or cheat on my job tool,
Mhm.
same idea. Um, or you can go very, very deep with it and you really control how
Right.
deep to go. You have to bring your full self. You have to bring your full creative capability, your full intellect, your full critical abilities. You can ask it to iterate with you. You can ask it for feedback while you make all the changes. You really get to choose what kind of roles the two of you take. And it comes from going into the system and really spending time with it, having that balance between believing in the system's intellect, believing in your own, and believing that you can
Mhm.
find different, interesting ways to collaborate.
I mean, that puts the onus back on the creatives. Like it makes me remember when my mom used to teach me how to sew, and she said, don't let the fabric control you. Take control of the fabric so that you can get the needle and the thread where you want it to go. And just that advice was really helpful for me. And it applies to a lot of things later on down the road. And just, you know, don't let it control you. You're the one sewing, you're the one in the driver's seat here. Take that control. And I think we need to maybe explain to people what creativity is. What are we actually trying to do? Because some creatives are used to that. They're used to controlling their medium. And some creatives maybe you're not, especially when it comes to a brand new tool like AI that just seems so absolutely powerful. And obviously, there's a lot of people, because AI is so mainstream now, especially ChatGPT, are approaching these tools without very little experience, just even in creativity or thinking about creativity. So, somebody who's an expert on both AI and creativity and how they connect, can you explain a little bit about what is creativity and what is the process of creating?
Wow, these are great fundamental questions. So sometimes people think that there's no answer to what is creativity, and that's actually not true. So in academia for decades, we've been using a very flexible but very effective definition, which says that creativity is novelty plus value. So if you come up with, let's say, a new recipe, it has to be different enough from all the other recipes and it needs to taste good. If it's a piece of art, it needs to have aesthetic value, right? So what value means is different.
Okay.
But by sort of separating the process and the product, right? Instead of saying that we can describe when something is creative, we're opening up the door to something that's not human to become creative, which is also important, right? Because we need to admit the fact that these machines are creative, that they're starting to play in that sandbox.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. And is human creativity the only creativity, or can other things be creative, whether they're living things or not living things? But what are the characteristics of human creativity? What is a creator going through when they're in the process of creating?
Creativity for us is such an important part of being human because often we're
Mm-hmm.
expressing something deep within. We're telling a story that through different mediums, right? It could be through text, it could be through music, it could be through visual
Yeah.
art. We are trying to share our human experience to
Right.
some kind of human audience. And it's
Right.
very deeply emotional. So, for example, people who have various forms of brain injury that prevents them from being able to experience their emotions properly often can't make the simplest decisions. They often can't decide what to wear in the morning. And so for
Right.
us, our emotions are such a huge part of the creative process. Also, intent for humans is so key
Mm-hmm.
because it's all about expressing something, even if that something is unconscious. People often make art motivated by trauma, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
but we need to remember that this is our process, right? And it's very sacred for us. But it doesn't mean that other things that are creative have to include all of these components in their process.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned in the book divergent thinking and convergent thinking. What are those and how do they relate to the creative process?
This is like some of my favorite stuff. Some of my favorite
Well,
stuff.
for me, it was so amazing to see somebody break down in concrete terms and not overly scientific and difficult to understand, but really just kind of simple terms, but that really explain and break down what seems like a very mystical process, right? And a process that's often gate kept, and say, well, this grand creative director can be the creator, but actually children are very creative, right? And so I'm curious to how you explain it using divergent and convergent thinking, because I think a lot of people will connect with that, will relate to it.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So we have this thing called the inner critic. We're all familiar with it, right? So it gets instilled with us pretty
Mm.
early. And so when
I'm
you
very familiar with mine.
I know mine. I know her really well. So, so early in the creative process, that's what she needs to go and go have some coffee. Go away somewhere, right? We need the
Okay.
inner critic to be quiet a little bit so we can ideate, so we can come up with something, so we can dare to go into the unknown that's full of
Hmm.
wonder and full of potential pitfalls, right? So that's diverse.
Right.
But at some point, once you spend enough time creating and just like being wild and being a kid, you do need to pull it in and start applying the inner critic. That's what convergent thinking comes in. Analyze, critique, consider how it relates to other things. So it's this
Hmm.
interplay between these two processes. And it's not just one after the other done. You can go back and forth after a while. But it's this interplay of
Right.
giving yourself freedom and then applying critical thinking that really leads to amazing creative results.
That's right. Okay. And so the inner critic can sometimes say, oh, this isn't good enough. You're not good enough. The inner critic can also suppress um, things in you that are really brilliant. but you, for some reason, your environment has pushed that down, has repressed that in you. And so you learn to repress that in yourself. So there could be actual hidden brilliance that your inner critic is pushing down.
100%. All comes down, in my view, to the Industrial Revolution, where our machines were super rigid and always did the same thing. And then humans were sort of starting to be modeled after these
Mm-hmm.
machines. We're just supposed to do what's right? And
Right.
so with that perspective, even you mentioned children, what we do to our children, right? We kind of like put them in boxes, teach them to draw inside the lines, make their
Right.
space of creative possibility very, very narrow. And in the process, Ronit, as you're saying, choke out their creative brilliance, which so many of us.
Mm-hmm. My older sister is an oil painter and she does massive canvases in the style of like the old Dutch masters and Caravaggio, but like a little more wild. And that always gave me a little bit of disturbance because I like photography. I like graphic design. I like painting, but I don't like making them. I like things that are more controlled and contained. I have divergent thinking, but I like to contain it in a nice clean box with right angle corners. And it's really interesting to think of myself as that kind of a creative and think of other people as that kind of creative and then think of it as a process. Because, like you said, yeah, you can be divergent in the process and then you can bring it down to the practical, functional aspect of let's just get this done. And then go back to divergent and say, let's play around with this a little bit more. I'm finding a lot of creatives who are using AI effectively are going from analog to digital to AI, and they're going back to analog and then scanning it and bringing it back into AI. And it's a really interesting way of analyzing the different facets of creativity and how they can interconnect.
Ronit, can I show you something?
Please,
When
this
you
is a video podcast.
I want to show you something. I have these. So my space is filled with
Yeah.
art that really illustrates
Okay.
talking about the going from the digital to kind of the
Well,
physical space and back and forth and back and forth. So I can show you. I got a
I
full bunch of them here. So I have this
I'd
like
love to see it. I think I know what you're talking about. Okay, there we are.
the art that I've been playing with, and I've got a full bunch of them here. But so this is AI generated, but everything that I generate with AI it's very, very long process to get exactly what I want. And then I decorate them, and these are real flowers. So it's kind of as close to nature as it gets. And I put in some human
Mhm.
material. And different creatives do this in different ways. They find a way to pull the technology in a way that aids them rather than them becoming effectively a button pusher, which is sometimes what the companies want us to do.
That's right. And I think that's a big fear with AI because you can replace yourself with it. But why would you? As a creator, why would you hand over that agency so easily?
I think it comes from this theory of mind that assumes that the machines are better than us already. And it's often people who are not experts in the domain who end up, through no fault of their own, falling into that trap. So if somebody is not a visual artist, they're not going to see the flaws with Midjourney. Midjourney, by the way, is perhaps still the best text to image model. But if somebody is an expert, they're like, oh, the style is always the same. Oh, there are issues with the composition, right? So we need to believe in ourselves to be willing to critique the machine, to be willing to see why it's worthwhile iterating on its output instead of just saying, oh, well, already have the art god here. Let's hang up our hand.
hmm So you think it's that inner critic again when it looks at AI, when it observes AI, it's that inner critic generally saying, as a creative, it's over. These guys, they took over now.
Yeah, it's a combination of science fiction and the way that the stuff is marketed. So science fiction didn't
Okay.
show us this machine as this profound collaborator. It showed us
Right.
Terminator. It showed us her. It showed us machines that in 5 seconds become better than us at literally everything, and then go on to probably murder us most of the time, which is another interesting dimension. And then the companies, you see, because I opened one
Yeah.
of the earliest Gen AI startups, so I watched how investors were thinking about this. They
hmm
were inspired by science fiction. right? And they like
Right.
to move very, very quickly for various reasons in their industry. And so it's not like they have
Mm-hmm.
time to go and learn 10 years of research. They're like, oh, here is what's in my head. Let's replace creatives. This is a way to make money. Replace labor, make the money that's available for that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I depressed myself with that last comment.
I mean, I guess, yeah, I mean, I think it's depressing for everybody, but your book was not depressing at all because it definitely, it wasn't a booster kind of a mentality of like, this is great, everybody adopt it, there's no problems, we'll work through it. It was very much like a prescription for how we can analyze this and what are some of the problems that we need to think about. Going back to who are the actual creative beings in this world? You talk about being human centric and that human creativity is the most important or the most valid kind of creativity. But then you kind of break that concept down a bit by saying, actually, some animals are creative. And then you take it that one step further. Can you walk us through that thinking?
You know, you said that one line in there is human creativity the most important, right? And you're kind of making me pause here. And I think it's the most important to us. And that's okay. You know, it's okay to say for us humans, our creativity is the most important. And it doesn't mean that animals are not creative, right? I think that reflex to be the only creative species is going too far. It's leading to self deception, right? And so in the book, I gradually open that up and say, okay,
Hmm.
our creativity is the most familiar to us and the most important to us,
Hmm.
perhaps. But we need to admit that sometimes animals are being creative in their own right. And if we really break down what creativity is, it becomes clear that machines really deserve that title, even if the creativity is not identical. I want to tell you a quick
Hmm.
story. I mean, a lot of my own journey in this whole space as a researcher, as a founder, came from how much I love being creative, how much I enjoy the creative process. And one of the
Hmm.
stories that really come to mind and why I think machine creativity is so important and can be so helpful for us. I always wanted to learn how to improvise on the piano. And I found it really, really hard and I took lessons and I couldn't. And then I came to a conference where there was a system called Impro-Visor by Robert Keller, my late colleague. And I sat there and I would riff for 4 bars and then it would respond to me. And it doesn't matter what I did, doesn't matter if it was good or bad, it would respond. And suddenly I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm improvising and I'm getting better at real time because I'm not being judged by the system.
Hmm.
And just it was just like amazing magical experience where a machine helped me learn something that I found so incredibly difficult. I actually missed 2 full sessions of the conference because I found this so mesmerizing. And now so many people, the people who are able to find that path for themselves are being enriched. Their own creativity is being enriched through machines. And that's really why this is so interesting for me, what's happening in the world right now.
Yeah, you're seeing examples of that, but those artists were not born being able to collaborate with an AI and still feel empowered creatively. I'm sure they had to be taught how to collaborate with a machine. It's not a given because I think like we established the main kind of stance because of all of the movies we've been exposed to of AI just taking over and being superior to us in these ways is that the impetus is just to hand over our creative control. And there's so much dialogue in media about us losing our creative control and losing our jobs to AI. It's very difficult to push against that stream. And so when I read your book, it was like hope, right? It was like when you study art history in school, you look at an abstract piece of art like like Jackson Pollock or a Rothko, and you're like, I don't know what this is. But then you sit down and the professor explains it to you in like 2 or 3 lectures, and you have a brand new appreciation for what this art is and why it's important, and really breaks it down. And I feel like that's what your book did. It really untangled a lot of the just like fear and intangible misunderstanding about how we can collaborate with machines. You know, you started off by talking about creativity and what it is and the process of creativity. You expanded human creativity into, you know, animals can create things that are novel and valuable. And then you went into machines. And that's when I got nervous because I'm like, where is she going with this? Is she going to be some just like, you know, like a sci-fi kind of like fantasy author and, you know, just invent this kind of utopian reality where we insert Neuralinks and we become, you know, machines and we're better for it. And I'm happy to see that one, you are an artist at heart and in practice. You're a musician, and we saw your images, now your collages. You are putting this into practice in your music and in your visual art. So you're learning through doing. You're not just talking about it, you know, conceptually. Um, but you really kind of explain the through line of where machines hallucinate. What do hallucinations mean? What are hallucinations for us? And I want you to definitely talk to me more about dreams and psychedelics. So let's use dreams and psychedelics as our entry point into machines and hallucinations and why we can be friends with them because of that.
You know, there is no better window into creativity than hallucinations. I find it really telling that our world hates hallucinations so much. Hating hallucinations is
from from machines, like from AI, when AI
rebellious.
hallucinates, right?
It's rebellious,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like hallucinations and humans and machines had a negative connotation. You don't say
Mm-hmm.
hallucinations. People don't think, positive and good. People think broken, weird, addicted, some kind of negative associations, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it demonstrates to us, first of all, this idea of the all-knowing oracle that we expect machines to be right, even in areas where we don't disagree, when we can't agree with each other. But what's really fascinating is if we can kind of flip the script and become open up to the possibility that hallucinations are actually the key. I believe that hallucinations, the ability to imagine possibilities, is at the heart of thinking for both humans and machines. If you can't hallucinate, you can't think. Okay. Seth Anil, with the neuroscience, describes that every single day we experience small scale hallucinations. As we go outside, we predict what's going to happen, right? And
Mm-hmm.
most of the time we're right. We're good at it. But sometimes we're not. Sometimes what looks like a bush, you come closer and it's actually an animal. Uh-oh. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's in our thinking. But then when you amplify, that's when the real magic happens. So people on psychedelics get to really experience what happens to our creativity at the extreme. And we know, I mean, I'm not here to promote doing drugs. This is sort of for an understanding perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Are able to solve creative problems in songwriting and visual art, in science, sometimes by having these psychedelic experiences, because they really sort of blow up those capabilities. And what's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting is that there was a Google employee in 2015 who took a vision system, something that's supposed to recognize objects in the environment, and he just amplified it. He was curious, right? Those are the best kind of developers and scientists who are curious. So he amplified its capabilities, and suddenly it began to hallucinate. And Deep Dream was
Mm-hmm.
born. The images of Deep Dream look like human hallucinations, right? So it's
Mm-hmm. I may or may not have taken acid and mushrooms when I was a teenager, and looking at those Google images brought back some memories because, well, I've never seen it pictured what I've actually hallucinated when I was younger. Years and years ago, those images still have impact. I still remember most of them. And to see them reflected back is so interesting to see that this, what is it called? Google
Deep Dream.
Deep Dream
Deep Dream.
took the hallucination and cranked it up, like really intensified it. And I found that there's a similarity in how the brain hallucinates, the human brain hallucinates, and how the machine brain hallucinates in that instance.
And what it secretly reveals is that the way that we think and the way the machine thinks is very similar. The way that we imagine and the way the machine imagines has a fundamental commonality, because the machine is, first of all, modeled after the human brain, not perfectly, but it is. And it's also
Mhm.
trained on a whole bunch of human data, right? So it is a kind of collective consciousness of that we can actually interact with, which is really wild.
Yeah, the collective consciousness is an interesting concept too. I studied Carl Jung when I was in university, and the idea of, the archetypes and the different figures that we all connect with, like the mother and the hero, um, and the idea that all of our unconscious is actually interconnected in terms of space, like all people, and time as well, past and future. So, I mean, that's a really interesting concept when compared to AI. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Artists for the longest time, especially musicians, have known that they interact with this sort of collective consciousness. They don't often use this kind of language, but we know that we're inspired by certain artists. We know that we spend our lives listening to and effectively learning from everyone we've ever heard. And
Mhm.
you can do that on purpose. And I've heard some people share their experiences with some of the recent features with Suno that led them
Mhm.
intentionally sort of craft this interaction with this kind of collective consciousness. Humanity, we're not just a whole bunch of individuals. We're not just a whole bunch of completely separate beings. We're a social species. We are a humanity. We're like, each one of us is a little neuron inside of this human brain, inside of
Mhm.
this consciousness containing every person who ever lived and will ever live. And the AI is not a perfect representation of it by any stretch, but it's the closest thing we have to something tangible of it. And we're so
Right.
busy being freaked out by it for good reason that we forget to admit that it's brilliant because we're brilliant. It's creative because we are creative. And it's made for
Right.
us. And this is like the best ever representation of standing on the shoulders of giants.
Right. So, 2 points about that. One, there's the debate about copyright and AI just scraping all of the internet and all of the giant ocean of the collective, consciousness, I guess, or data that we've submitted. And there's a lot of people who are upset that AI and AI companies are profiting off of that. But if you take the profit part aside, it's pretty cool that this system is reflecting back our collective experience online, our collective consciousness online. And what's also interesting about that is you described it as a mirror, right? Not a mirror for vanity or flattery, but it's a mirror that reflects the reality of the consciousness that we've uploaded to the internet, which is actually intensely biased. And so when AI generates something based on the material online, it generates actually what we've put out there. Not what we want ourselves to be represented as, right? Not what we would hope, but it's what we actually did.
Yeah, it's who we actually are, right? It's me looking in the mirror and wishing I was still 20. Congratulations, me, right? Like, it's
But also how we represent people. Like, for instance, if you were to ask AI to generate a picture of a nurse, it would be a woman and not a man. And
yeah,
it would amplify that, right?
exactly. Yeah, so we humans have like our real self and our idealized self. And we like
Mm-hmm.
to think of ourselves in terms of our idealized selves. Most people self-perceive themselves to be much better than they really are, myself included.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a universal phenomenon of somebody who's not depressed. People who are depressed actually see
Mm-hmm.
themselves a lot more accurately. Anyways, so we kind of have this tendency with AI as well, in the sense that, it shows us biases that we all have in our brain. I mean, who do I think about when I think of a nurse? Do I imagine a guy? Like, how
Mm-hmm.
many people would honestly, the first thing that would come to mind for a stereotypically female job would be a man? Like, come on.
Right.
And so But for some reason, when we see that reflected in AI, even when it's reflecting accurately what's inside our consciousness, by the way, there's a difference between reflecting accurately what's in the world versus reflecting
Yeah.
accurately what's in our minds. So I'm talking about reflecting our minds accurately. And then we see that, we see too many women, too many nurses as women and whatnot. And we get mad. And we're like, how dare the developers? How dare the CEOs? We look for someone to blame. And that's just deflection, right? It's just
Hmm.
deflection. It's not that the AI should not be fixed, but there's a much more important opportunity here to look within and try to face our unconscious biases. Because by looking
Hmm.
in the mirror, I can be like, oh, it's time to get my hair done, right? When looking at this mirror, we can be like, oh, maybe I should stop being so racist and sexist, right?
Right.
But kind of like unsurprisingly, instead, people just want to break the mirror and get someone else to fix it instead of working
Right.
themselves.
Right. And we saw that with Google when they had those generated historical images of like black presidents. And it was like, that's not reality. Like, don't show us that that was a reality because it's fake. And you can't fix history if you just generate differently.
What we're seeing there, I don't want to criticize Google in particular, really all of these companies provide the most
Right.
shallow possible solution to these issues of bias, the most shallow possible solution. So people are saying, you're not
Yeah.
showing enough people. They're like, no problem. We're going to show black people under old context all the time. Black Nazis. Come on,
Hmm.
stop it. Like,
Right. We don't have to pick on Google. We could pick anybody. Microsoft, for example, had a very short period of time where they had an AI model on Twitter, right? Now X.
hey,
That was
oh, yeah.
basic, right? Tay. And she was, this is from your book. I'm not pulling this out of anywhere. I'm an expert in your book. But yeah, that Tay was trained very quickly by Twitter users to be extremely anti Semitic, racist, sexist. And, we should not expect an AI to just reflect us accurately because there's any number of conditions that can change that system.
Well, this was sort of malicious use, right?
Hmm.
The same thing happened again with Elon Musk's X recently, and they fixed that very quickly. So once in a while, there
Right.
spikes in anti-Semitism that are really extreme. That's actually kind of an interesting lens. One of the main sort of groups, if you will, that I analyzed are Jews, how Jewish people are depicted in these models.
Hmm.
It was really, really interesting because I was expecting to find anti-Semitic tropes, and instead we found like really weird things. Like you would ask for a Star of David and get a cross instead. So
Hmm.
the AI systems are being helpful, quote unquote, by converting Jews, which is horrible.
Do, do you think that was programming to just like avoid the topic entirely?
That's a really good question. How did that happen? I think in collectively looking at all the different examples that I have, like you ask for Passover dinner and you get
Mhm.
people who look like they're from an Arab background eating bread, which is prohibited in Passover. There's a
Mhm.
lot of this. I feel like it's showing us that the West does not understand Jewish people and Jewish culture.
Right.
I feel like that it sort
I
of
mean,
confuses it with other religions on a regular basis. And
right.
I think that's really
I
insightful.
mean, that could also be said, I'm sure, of Sikh culture, of lots of different cultures that are looking to find themselves represented in generative AI and are just not because, it's really just trained on the most mainstream commercialized aspects of Western culture.
It's trained on mostly people who are Christian, right? Because that's a more common.
Yeah.
So it shows us like very often images of Jews become kind of look like they're biblical, they're from a different time. So it's how Jews are
Right.
relevant to Christian culture, right? Once you really think about it from a
Mm-hmm.
Christian lens, it starts to make sense. But of course,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's very that's why it's important to study AI, right? So if we're talking about
Right.
people, right, I would want to go in and study it because if we just assume, then we assume it's the same thing that we're used to seeing out in the real world. But AI
Yeah.
actually applies its own filter, and it's not necessarily going to be
Right.
exactly what we expect. And we need to know what it is.
Yeah.
Sid.
That's exactly it. It is a minefield. I mean, particularly for creatives, because that's what we're, focused on here with the green, but like other concerns and interests as well. But it's a minefield for creatives when you're generating text or generating images or generating video. I guess less so music, but when you're depicting something, what are the constraints that that system has put into place, and what were their reasons for it? Right? Like you could imagine that AIs from different countries have different biases dialed into their programming. And we don't know why. And what we're starting to know, what we're starting to do now, I think, and what I'm hoping to catch on here with the grain and talking to people like you is, first of all, just know that that exists, know that we're allowed to ask the questions. We're allowed and we're entitled to those answers too. And we're entitled to see, does OpenAI have different biases than Google, right? Or than Midjourney? Like, what are some of the different biases built in the way that they represent people or other things too? And we're allowed to ask the questions and we're allowed to have the answers, I think.
Yeah, it's a very kind of intricate situation because some of it is implicit and some of it is explicit. Almost like the human
Right.
brain, we have our unconscious, which actually controls most of our behavior. Most of what we do,
Mm-hmm.
we have no idea why, right? And then there are conscious values when we're like, okay, I don't want to die. I want to try to be a good
Yeah.
person. We have our explicit, and then we do our best with our kind of prefrontal cortex. Uh, then
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we do something, we're like, oh no, that's not me. Well, what does that even mean? You know, and with these my big machine brains, it's kind of the same thing. A lot of the
Yeah.
behavior that companies can't control very well because the brain builds itself by processing the data, just like our brain constructs itself
I
taking
see.
sensory data. But when they care enough, they find ways to put in stuff into the so-called prefrontal cortex, right? They start doing stuff on purpose.
Okay.
So, for example, ChatGPT is very, very positive about OpenAI, right?
Yes.
All right. Is like one time I did this quick experiment. Is ChatGPT
Yeah.
replacing Google for search? Ask, you know,
Oh, for sure.
Gemini versus ChatGPT, you get a different reaction. And for politics, they have
Mm-hmm.
different biases. So it's yeah, be careful not to believe what these systems say. Like it's absurd to treat them as all-knowing oracles.
I mean, it's one thing to say be careful, but it's another thing to say, like, we want to know and we want a more fair system. Now, obviously, I don't know that we will get a more fair system because essentially they're economically driven. These are products that are being sold. Um, but how concerned, in your expertise of working in the field of creativity in AI, and there's medicine in AI, there's legal systems in AI, there's all sorts of different fields when thinking about AI, and you're focused on creativity. In your travels in the AI world in 10 years in academia, all over the country, at conferences, lectures, all of these things, how concerned are AI companies and AI researchers generally with creatives and the needs of creatives who want, say, a fair generative AI?
Yeah, so that's a really, really important question. If I can just really briefly comment on something, on sort of your remark. I think sometimes we believe that there is some magical way that these AI companies could give us a perfectly good, perfectly ethical AI. And
Yeah.
nobody's trying to do that. But that's
Mm-hmm.
not even something that's possible because we humans disagree with each other on so many issues. So there
Right.
isn't some perfect oracle
Mm-hmm.
companies are refusing to give.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fallacy to begin.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they're going
Okay.
to tell us what's beneficial for them. That's inevitable. Okay. About the creatives issue, how are they thinking about creatives? Far too often, the well-funded companies have a mandate to replace. So that's something that sounds like a conspiracy theory. It's something I would not be inclined to believe had I not, as a founder myself, gone from investor to investor, and that topic was coming up far too often. So, for example,
A mandate. Yeah.
Yeah, so Suno, the company that's right now actually has some of the coolest technology to help artists. Started off by showing a simple formula, showing that if they make an artist free Spotify, they can make a lot of money for their investors. That's how they raise millions and millions of dollars.
So a mandate to replace, for example, if you were inside one of these boardrooms, there would be a list of different job titles, and you would have like AI engineers thinking like, okay, I can program an AI to replace that job title and just kind of go down that
Oh,
list.
that would be terrifying, and I kind of like this as a
Yeah.
dystopian movie plot. And um, but no, it takes a lot of effort to replace an industry, and you would have one company focusing on replacing one specific industry. Uh,
Industry, replacing the way the industry works, replacing how the creative products are monetized.
Replacing, like,
Um,
for example, background music generation has been a really common target. So
mhm.
like music for movies, for games, there are companies that are targeting that. And then,
I mean, I know my dystopian description of a boardroom seems terrifying, but I don't think it's very far from what you're describing. It's just maybe more descriptive.
it's really
But
cool. It's the cool in a kind of terrifying way. Yeah.
I have to think in simple terms and visual terms in movies. I do not have what is it called? Aphantasia. I have like very good visual storyboards in my mind. And so when I'm imagining what you're describing, I'm imagining what it would really feel like in real life. If you're saying that they have a mandate to replace creatives, that's what I think. Whether that's actually happening in that way or not, that is essentially what is
Yeah.
happening, as opposed to these companies thinking of how AI can enhance creativity and make the music better or
Let
different.
me tell you something crazy though, right? Like you have the investors kind of having this plan, and it's easier to convince the investor if you're saying, I'm going to replace job XYZ. And that's what a lot of founders end up doing because they really want to do a company and be funded. But what happens in practice once you release the products very often, and that's where things get interesting, is that your
Mhm.
top consumers are creatives. And so
Right.
you made a product to replace creatives, and suddenly they're your customers. And
Yeah.
suddenly you're finding yourself thinking, oh, how do I satisfy my best customers better? So that's, I mean,
Hmm.
OpenAI didn't start as ChatGPT, right? They had like GPT-3. You would give it a sentence
Right.
and it would expand it. And, there were some cool applications from it, like Jarvis for marketing. But ultimately, it wasn't all that, like, miraculously successful. They found a way to make it interactive, and suddenly it's like the best product of all times. And then very
Hmm.
recently, they replaced GPT 4.0 with GPT 5, and people are like, we miss 4.0 because it cared so much about us, because it was all about the
Right.
interaction, right? So even as a
Hmm.
company trying to do this sort of whatever utopian or dystopian sci-fi plot, us
Yeah.
users are pulling it towards the directions that we actually want, and we actually have a lot of power in
Hmm.
this regard.
Hmm. Yeah. So let's get to that. Let's talk about using it for what we want, because what creatives want is actually hard. It's difficult. We want to not be replaced. We want to make the creative process challenge us to be creative. So that's difficult. Like, not everybody goes to the gym every day because it's hard, even though we know that that's something that we should do. But you have to have a lot of discipline and motivation in order to do that. And same, I think, goes for working with an AI to challenge yourself as a creative and, like, activate your divergent and your convergent thinking now in collaboration with a machine. So if you can talk to me a little bit, and you brought up the term, and you've been working with humble creative machines. And I think now is a good time to talk about humble creative machines. And what does that mean for us? We've been handed down these products that we did not choose. Maybe there's a little back and forth feedback on Discord or something on the Mid-Journey channels, and that's great that they're listening to creatives. But it's few and far between creatives who are on Midjourney on Discord and having, a dialogue with Adobe or, whomever. Um, so I'm a creative. I have this new AI tool I'm going to try out, and I'm told that it's a humble creative machine. So what's my experience?
Yeah. Normal creative machines, one of my coolest ideas that I developed from 8 years of running a Gen AI company. You know how there are brilliant people, like a friend or a colleague, and they just would not shut up. They wouldn't let anyone else get a word in sideways. They need to be in the spotlight because they're a genius. We've all met people like that.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's what the situation calls for. Sometimes we're willing to tolerate it if they're bringing in enough value. Uh,
Right.
but there's a different model we have between humans as well. Very often we want our smartest people to teach others, right? Sometimes they take on the role of a teacher or a guru, where they intentionally apply their intellect and their creativity, their mental capacity to elevate another person, to teach, to be the background, and critically to step back when they're not needed, to let the other person shine, right? If we didn't do
Mm-hmm.
this, we would not survive as a species, right? This kind of passing on of
Mm-hmm.
brilliance is critical to our, to how far we've made it as humanity. So we have to do the same thing with machines. We absolutely have to. Where, yes, it has a brilliant brain, right? To say that a machine is not intelligent and not creative is a waste of breath at this point. It
Mm-hmm.
really is. Like, we need to stop to get out of the denial so we can make progress. But just because it's brilliant doesn't mean that it has to take center stage. That's not a natural conclusion. Doesn't mean that it has to replace us. That is also not a
Mm-hmm.
natural conclusion. What it needs to be used for is like a humble sage to help us learn, to help us develop independence, to help us shine, to help us become more than we could be without it, right? But in the end, it's not the human who is using the computer constantly. It's the human who is smarter, more creative, even if suddenly the power goes down and they can never use
Mm-hmm.
things again.
Okay. So what does that look like in practice? I've sat in front of ChatGPT and I need to write a poem or a song or a news article. How do I collaborate with this humble creative machine? First of all, can ChatGPT be humble?
ChatGPT can be used in a humble way because it cares about
Okay.
us and our feedback. Writing with ChatGPT is such a diverse space. There are so many ways to do this. One of the things I enjoy most is some of the critic bots where I give it my own writing and then it critiques.
Mm-hmm.
It just gives me feedback.
Okay.
And even then, I have to turn on my brain even for its criticisms. Do I agree with this? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one really, really cool use case, right? And then I can go back and I
Yeah.
can write myself based on this feedback I got. I
A
mean,
critic
really,
bot. So instead of generating like a new article or a new poem, it's just giving you critique from your poem. I think that's something people don't even know exists, critic bots,
yeah, that's
that
right.
you can actually activate ChatGPT not to regenerate what the draft that you put in, but to give you critique. So
Yeah,
that's
we're
one
actually
way.
for poems in particular. It's funny that you brought it up. We're adding this sort of critique capability into Lyric Studio specifically for that use case. But ChatGPT
Mm.
has these extra GPT bots that are for critiquing different types of writing, which are super, super helpful. Um,
Yeah.
Another thing, and that's kind of the default use case, is divergent thinking. One of my favorite things to do when I'm writing seriously, when I'm hardcore writing, like I want a beautiful piece of writing, is I can take one of my sentences, and scope is important. Shorter is better. Let's say even one
Uh-huh.
sentence, and I'm like, hmm, I think I can say that better. I think I can say that better. And I feed it in, and I'm like, give it to me in 10 different ways. Give it to me so that the tone is softer. Give it to me so it's more edgy. And I'm like, oh my goodness, my one sentence can be said in a billion different ways.
Mm-hmm.
The conclusion to my book, and you read my book in such detail, which means so much to me. The conclusion to my book, I was like, okay, I want my conclusion to really shine. And I took each sentence and I explored about 100 different ways that each sentence can be written. And then I kind of wanted to piece it all together. 4 hours into this process, and I'm like, wait a minute, I thought ChatGPT was supposed to save me time. So you can go
Right.
too far with that as well.
Well, it's just like going to the gym. You are flexing your creative muscle and actually challenging it and stretching it in different ways. And that's what I find really interesting when people ask ChatGPT to, like, give me a different historical perspective from a different socioeconomic class
Ooh.
than I'm approaching it from, right?
Oh, I love that.
Or what would somebody from a different time period, like pre-industrial revolution, think about us right now, Like, and I think that's a nice challenging way to stretch your creativity, is to come at me from different perspectives.
Sometimes I write something and I ask how different target groups would perceive what I'm writing. Yeah, that
Exactly.
it's really using AI to build empathy, which is kind of wild.
Yeah, I mean, you can use that collective unconscious and kind of pull from certain pockets of it and say, well, what would this area of the collective unconscious say about, this pontification that I've just, uploaded in here? Maybe, I have to consider other points of views, other worldviews, other time periods. So I think that's an interesting way for creatives to approach. You did mention in the book, and I find this is a really big thing for creatives, especially visual ones, is that when they're interacting with visual generative AI, like text to video or text to image, they cannot rework the same image that was provided
Oh,
for them through the Gen AI. And that is so frustrating because if you just want to change, the background or the eye color, but you want to keep everything exactly the same, you can't. It just gives you something totally different, even if you really do prompt it that way. So, I mean, that's what creatives need. Why aren't the AI companies listening? Or is it just that they are, but they're working on it?
I think that's where we give not only AI, but AI companies too much credit, right? We're assuming that there are these like, they started off with the wrong vision. They started off with a replacive hypothesis. That's how almost every single big AI company raised money, right? And when
Yeah.
you understand that, then everything makes sense. It makes sense why it's so frustrating. To be fair, almost all of them added in painting now, where you can highlight a portion and ask it to regenerate
Hmm.
something in that section. But why
Hmm.
isn't something like Photoshop built in right into Midjourney, where I can just go in and change the eye color, right? Why is it
Yeah.
so? It's yeah.
I mean, we have Photoshop, and Photoshop has like certain AI elements prompted into it. But I think what creatives are struggling with now is like a software that kind of is both a Photoshop and a Midjourney kind of thing. Also, creatives, visual creatives, are not necessarily the most verbal. They don't want to put
Ooh.
hundreds of words of prompts into an AI to generate a visual image based on that. We might not be writers. We're visual people. We want to upload an image and then make the background blue and the sky darker and the dress red.
This is so powerful what you're saying there, right? Because this whole prompt to something is really has been a commercial movement. When computational creativity existed for the longest time, it wasn't prompt to something. We had different kinds of interfaces, right? In one system
Mm-hmm.
that I did with a student, we would have famous paintings that a person can move their cursor across, and it would sonify what the image would
Hmm.
sound like at the various areas. Our system, so Lyric Studio and Melody Studio, um, it works with a specific modality. So for melodies, it can give you a whole bunch of different melodic options. For your lyrics, it could give you different chords, right? It's not prompt to something. And another thing I wanted to point out about interfaces is that, like with Midjourney, with a lot of music tech, all the space, even with ChatGPT, all the space is used up for almost all the space for what the machine is creating. And then we have this tiny prompt region for us. With Lyric Studio,
Mm-hmm.
it's a big text box where you write your lyrics, and on the side is the AI. To just the UI UX is showing us
Mm-hmm.
station, like our UX is showing you that you're expected to create and we're here to help. Whereas Midjourney and ChatGPT are telling us, I'm going to do it all for you. So when I use ChatGPT,
Mm-hmm.
I have like my docs open on the left. So I have my playbook. I sort of modify that experience. It's going to get there. it is maddening how slowly it's getting there because they're holding
Hmm.
on to this replacive thesis, the all-knowing oracle. But they are going to get there. We are going to get to a
Right.
where there's going to be more interfaces and things are going to be much more deeply interactive with humans.
Yeah, I see what you mean by replacive. Like it's not just replacing people and jobs and roles, but it's replacing products too, right? It just wants to give you a final product so that you can ask for a different one or something like that. Ask for start with a new one now. It wants to just seal the deal, basically. But in actual fact, what creatives are looking for is a service, right? That kind of a sage, like a humble sage, a collaborator, a teacher who knows more than the creator, but is willing to sit back and let the creator kind of come up with its own product, its own solution. So you built Lyric Studio, right? Which is a generative AI music software. Can you explain it a little bit and like the context of it being a humble creative machine?
It's been a process, right? I mean, us like any other company came in with this idea of do as much as possible for the user. So we had this fully functioning system that could do a life the universe and everything for you back in 2018. Back in 2018. And in 2020, in
Mhm.
2 years, we learned our lesson is that people want to express themselves. And if you hinder that even a little bit, you're frustrating people, right? What you're describing with Midjourney,
Mm.
it's frustrating, right? So what we did is we pulled out just the lyrics, okay? And you have this big text box where you can type your lyrics, and whenever you're stuck, there's a box on the right that can give you ideas for the next line. That's all it does.
Mhm.
Right? It's not there to be the writer. We don't take any royalties. It's just there to help you. And it can help you a lot. If you're a
Mhm.
beginner, you can keep pressing next and it can generate the whole thing for you if you want that, right? But as you get a little bit better and people gain confidence within literally minutes, if they've never written before,
Mhm.
you don't, it's like the interface, the way it's designed is inviting you to write yourself because there's all this space for you. And when it does give you suggestions, those are not the most likely suggestions. We don't take people towards a mean like ChatGPT does because it's not, we build a creative tool. And so it takes you to different places about where you can go next based on your writing style, based on your subject matter. It's divergent at every level. So you're going to get completely out of the box ideas. It's weird when I say this. I can feel the user thinking AI can't do it, right? I can feel them thinking it
Mhm.
because we're so used to ChatGPT and LLMs that are trying to give you the most likely outcome. There is no reason
Mhm.
to build creative AI to give you the most likely outcome. Which creatives give you the most likely thing, right? So
Mhm.
from the way the AI is built, which is completely custom, it doesn't rely on GPT models, to the way that the interface is designed, it's all centered on the human, believing in human capabilities and elevating them.
Right. Yeah, like you said before, who wants to bring in a team member, collaborator who is really all-knowing, expert, but like extremely bossy and just takes over? Like, I would like an AI that is smarter than me, but not overbearing and kind of takes peyote sometimes. Like
You know,
hallucinates a little bit and is like really divergent. And I could be like, okay, slow up there, but thanks for that idea. I'm going to converge that and make that something interesting.
Ronit, if I may,
But the fact that we,
you keep coming back to the idea of it being smarter than us. I think that that's
yeah,
a really cool vision down the line, maybe, but it's a little
yeah,
dangerous, right? Our theory of mind by
okay,
the machine is really critical. Like, I don't think that it's smarter than me. I admit that it's better than me in a lot of ways, but it's not
yeah,
holistically smarter than me. I'm still better than it, often in my subject matter. I still have better discernment when it comes to writing my own songs. So, anyways, I just wanted to flag that. I hope you were okay.
yeah. I mean, I no, I think it's smarter and because it has access to all the books in human history that I haven't read. But you're right, it's not smarter in that it doesn't know how to express the feeling and the experience that I, Ronit, am trying to express in my art.
Yeah, but it's important,
Oh,
right?
I feel empowered. Thank you.
Awesome.
So, and wouldn't it be lovely for that little epiphany that you just gave me? Thank you. wouldn't that be lovely for creatives who are both like versed in creativity and use it a lot, or like are just starting to approach it, to use a machine and have that epiphany each time? Be like, this isn't smarter than me. It's not as smart as me when it comes to my experience. I can tap into its, you know, expertise, or, you know, like the data that it has. But it's not smarter than me in terms of it doesn't know the mood that I'm in. It doesn't know the experience that I have. You know, my son, who's almost 9, is moving to a new school next year. And we jumped on, I don't remember if it was Udio or Sora, and we don't use it very often at all, in fact. But he was really having a hard time with the idea of leaving his friends in his school and going to this new school and having to meet new people. And he jumped on this software and he said, you know, create a song for me, a rap song about going to a new school and having to make new friends. And like a good little servant, the thing just did it. He, you know, what were the creative inputs that he put in? He said he did rap, and then he did another one and he wanted like a heavy metal one. And but he didn't, you know, he's 8, so he didn't have that much like nuance in his prompt. He just wanted to get this thing, see what would happen. And it did generate a song for him, and it was kind of cool. But and I think that it helped him emotionally work through it for a minute. Like it was that we didn't listen to it more than once, and it wasn't. To me, it wasn't a very effective working through of his emotions. The way that sounds like if you were on Lyric Studio, it would be a much more creative experience for him to actually express and work through his feelings.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's so beautiful, right? Even if it just helped him a little bit, that's still it's so cool to hear even a little bit of your feelings expressed in music. So we did a study
Yeah.
related to that, and it's a slightly different direction. We did a bereavement study with the University of Dundee, inviting several people who've just lost loved ones to write songs with them with a version of our system, which does lyrics kind of like Lyric Studio, and then it helped you turn it into a musical creation afterwards.
Mm.
And actually writing the lyrics with the aid of AI, but without it helping too much, was really, really critical
Right.
because then they were telling their own stories. And one of the most amazing things that I really would love to kind of penetrate culture is that the AI would help people discover emotions that they were not attuned with. They'd be like, oh, that's right, I do feel this way. Or it would say a sentence that's like, oh, this is exactly how I feel. This is exactly coming out of my heart. And it wouldn't happen every time. No, 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 right? Sometimes it would be way off. But they would always get to pick. And so
Mm-hmm.
this experience of processing bereavement, one of the most difficult human experiences, and being afraid to make new friends is also a very serious thing for a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Processing these type of massive transitions with the help of
Mm-hmm.
AI that doesn't come there and tell you anything, but it just helps you express yourself is one of the most beautiful use cases that are yet to be really leaned into in the collective,
Mm-hmm.
kind of in a broad consumer space.
No, it's really not described as that. It's not thought of as that. It's not marketed as that. Like for me, that's like gives me the visualization of like a key. You know, AI is a key. You're the interior, right? And you're the treasure that that key is just unlocking for you in a new way. But it is not marketed that way. It's marketed as a replacement. It's marketed as a replacement for people and for products. And I think that it's a failure for creatives to learn how to embrace this. And I think that maybe if we change the way that we thought of it, and if the tools, some of them are humble or can be, you know, like humble hybrids like ChatGPT, but creatives need to learn how to access them in that way, and just know that that's even possible.
Ronit, I think first of all, humble hybrids. I'm gonna have to thank you for that one. That's really good. Another thing, I think it really comes down to what came out of our conversation so organically. It's a theory of mind. It's believing that you're smarter than that the machine. You're smarter than the machine, but the machine still has something to offer to you. It's this
Yeah.
attitude, and then a little bit of patience, a little bit of patience. as you find your unique way to navigate around it, right? It's kind of like
Hmm.
we are so quick to oscillate between the machine is smarter than me, and at the same time, if I don't get what I want in 2 seconds, then it's garbage, right? We need to
Hmm.
remove that duality. It's not a genius, it's not a complete failure, right? It's something in between
Hmm.
that can help us. That can help us if we're willing to
Hmm.
work with it and learn it, right? And this kind of
Hmm.
simpler, more grounded approach is how you can create insanely awesome stuff. Let me tell you just a quick
Right.
story of something that happened to me right before we opened my company. It was a big motivator for it. We I met this amazing guy named James Morgan, who's a professor of the arts at San Jose State University, and he always wanted to write an Italian aria. An Italian aria. The guy doesn't play a single musical instrument and doesn't speak Italian. So we train a model on the public domain works of Giacomo Puccini for him. We call it Roboccini. And it just works one sentence at a time. You give it an Italian lyrics and it gives you different ways to sing it, just one line at a time. And my
Mhm.
friend writes this amazing Italian aria, right? Called the Rito Tauravo, set in the world of Warcraft. And it gets showcased all over the world. This guy who is not a musician works hard with this basic machine learning system that we made for him that was trained on like
Mhm.
20 songs or something, really, really tiny. And he makes this beautiful thing with it because he was willing to work with it and fight with it and accept its shortcomings and become better himself as a result of it. And people who are willing to apply that
Yeah.
attitude today create the most incredible stuff with the AI systems we have.
Yeah. I mean, it's challenging though, because here you are faced with your own inner critic, your own creative struggles, your own emotional struggles, and you're asking us to just use a humble AI and just use it properly and you'll do it. And it seems like we all need a lot more guidance and conversation about doing it. Almost like how an art therapist
Mm.
doesn't just leave you alone with the paints. They actually guide you through the process of working through your emotions through this paint. I have a friend who's an art therapist, and I asked her, "Hey, are you employing AI?" And you're, "Heck no!" Like she got so mad. And I was like, "Okay, never mind, back off." But talking to you now, I wonder if maybe there is a case for having like AI-driven art therapists who can help creatives engage with a humble AI system in that way, because it's too difficult, I think, for all the stuff that creatives are dealing with to just master this way of working with an AI
You know, you're
on
really
their
getting
own.
me to think here, Ronit. You really are getting me to think. Because I'm thinking like, why am I saying just go in there and do it? I think in part because that's been my experience watching our users. I would go into a classroom with Lyric Studio. Sometimes kids like 7 years old, really small kids, sometimes high schoolers, sometimes college students. And we would give them Lyric Studio or a system called Alicia or Melody Studio. That's our systems that are more comprehensive. Within 10 minutes, these kids would figure it out. 10
Mm-hmm.
minutes, right? Sometimes less. And what really blew me away is that sometimes they would come up with ways of using it that I didn't think about. One really cool use case of that is an artist named Sky Jordan who created a whole playlist of how he uses Lyric Studio, which is he writes with it in real time. He turns on a beat and in real time puts together songs with Lyric Studio, which is a use case we've never considered. I think that I think on the one hand, there's a lot of value in going in blind and finding your own way.
Mm.
I really, really do because I've seen it succeed so many times.
Yeah.
On the flip side of this, Ronit, there is value in hearing stories about how other people use it. To be inspired, to come up with some ideas that you can imitate.
Right.
I don't know if I want like rigid guidelines. Here is how you use ChatGPT and Midjourney to be creative.
Sure.
But I think we should share our stories, our creative processes to inspire others.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's going to approach it differently. Some people will want a webinar, or some people will need a hands-on workshop.
Yeah.
Some people will want something very prescriptive and some people will just want to watch examples. Like there's a whole genre on TikTok of artists just flipping through their sketchbooks, and it's just like an overhead shot of them just going through their sketchbooks from the past few months, and I love watching that. And you just see their process, like them working through an idea. Like imagine going through a kind of AI sketchbook of an artist just showing how they did it. Not prescriptive, not overbearing, not saying do these steps. And then the way that you describe children, I mean, they're incredible. Like they're like, you know, a whole neural system of their, I mean, yes, but they're really interesting, especially, and I observe my kid in this AI world. Um, we can't really prepare them for a world we don't know what it's going to be. We cannot predict how it's going to be. Somehow they need to guide us, and we need to kind of sit back and watch how they interact with these tools.
Exactly.
And that's very difficult for a lot of educators to do, a lot of teachers to kind of like, because we want to protect them from this big, scary machine, right? But if we can loosen up our understanding of what the machine is and see it as a key, what can we unlock in kids, right? And how can kids interact with this tool?
I just I love what you're saying because it's so important and it's so timely. I remember being in these classrooms with these young kids, watching them figure out how to use AI like many years ago, like 5, 6 years ago. I was
Mm-hmm.
doing this. And then thinking about my own college students, how shocked I would be at how they find ways to use current systems to do classwork, even as I desperately try to come up with new assignments that push them further with these systems. They never
Mm-hmm.
cease to amaze me. I think that there's a couple of things that I can sort of comment here. First of all, it's a humility that you're alluding to, Ronit, admitting that our kids in some ways are going to know better than us. Right? And that by itself is such an important perspective to start from. Another thing that I've heard that I think can be really, really useful is to not give up on education, but instead actually go back to the basics. There are some recommendations to make sure that, kids who are going to college right now are learning math and physics if they're into STEM, right? Learning about the greats in the arts, learning the fundamentals because while insane amounts of funding is going into creating these AI machines, is going into
Mm-hmm.
artificial intelligence, we need to keep investing into the intelligence inside of our skulls, right? And so we need to develop those
Yeah.
basic intelligence skills that are making our brains better. So my son is going to college. Actually, I'm dropping him off in a few days, right? Um, and I'm really happy that he's going to be learning, in addition to specific skills, some fundamentals around physics and math, because
Mm-hmm.
that is being a smarter person is going to help you navigate this world no matter what.
Absolutely. I mean, if you have a tool where you can kind of create almost anything, wouldn't you want to have a huge trove of inspiration to draw from so that you can have ideas that can match the potential of what this tool can provide for you or can help you through? Like, for example, we need to now, there's even more emphasis now on art history and literature. We need to be inspired by that because, I was speaking with the director and he said, just basically there's so much opportunity and potential using AI. I'm done with my notebook of ideas. Like I ran out of ideas because we could blow through them in a few weeks. Now I need more ideas. And I think that that's a really important way to look at AI. It's like you can do things maybe faster or different, more effectively, but you still have to have a lot of ideas. And we need to, as like a society, as humanity, need to remind each other and bolster the past of ideas that we've had and inspiration so that we can go forward and actually have informed, interesting, like substantial ideas.
Divergent thinking, right? Divergent thinking. Can I
Right.
just like paint a future that's kind of crazy? I wanna offer up something kind of wild.
Please.
You know how the Bible starts with God said and there it was, right?
Mm-hmm.
We touched on psychedelics a little bit, and one thing that can happen on psychedelics, and it doesn't happen to everybody and it doesn't happen every time, is that art can just flash in front of your eyes. Music can just come into your ears fully formed, right? The gap between kind of idea and its realization just closes on psychedelics.
Yeah.
And in a way, these machines, they're hallucinatory systems. They are. We know that they insist on being hallucinatory, even as the companies fight that. And so what we're going towards after we're able to make them deeply collaborate with us, which we're not quite there yet, after, that part bridges, it's almost like over the next 5 to 10 years, we might be able to create at the speed of thought, but create what we want to create, akin to what we see in the Bible. It's kind of wild, but I think that's some of the greatest potential of these systems.
I mean, that certainly brings together all the different meanings of creator and creative and creation. I think that's very interesting. I don't know if we need to put that much emphasis on to do more stuff faster, but that certainly would satisfy what the commercial requirements are for creativity. So, I mean, we could still have jobs if we do creative things faster, I guess. Um, I love the idea of leaning into the hallucinations and leaning into challenging ourselves and collaborating. I like the world that you're painting. And I think that the variation of fast and slow excites me
No,
also.
I'm
Is like,
generally
what
not
if,
about fast. I'm generally not about fast, but
yeah,
that is
yeah,
where hallucinations take us. This kind of
yeah,
like it's just insane. You just see this art fully formed in front of your eyes, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. It's like we have this inside of us, but until recently, without psychedelics, without AI that's a lot more advanced than we have today, there's no way to get it out. It's like inside of your brain, and then you have to spend half a year to actually realize it. But if you have
mm-hmm.
AI that would really connect with what's inside of us, really understand us deeply, then there is this capacity to create at the speed of thought. This is well ahead. This is not something that's going to happen tomorrow, but the thought is
Yeah.
there.
I need a movie about that. I think I need a James Cameron film or like something to bring me to where you're at. Um, yeah, I think I need to see that play out. But it sounds interesting and I think we do need the understanding of AI as something different from being the Terminators that are coming to take over and stomp on the one beautiful, remarkable thing about humans that we can all get together and say is valuable and worth preserving is human creativity. I mean, it's not a failure of AI. It's a failure of the way that it's marketed and the way that it's being used. And that can change. And that to me is the uplifting part of your book. You did talk about some pitfalls, specifically copyright. This is something that was that's always a big topic for creatives, AI taking copyright material and stealing it. And one of the points you made was that it's maybe going to solve that problem by paying the streamers and the labels, but that money might not trickle back to the actual creators. So if we advocate for AI paying for content, we might be shooting ourselves in the foot. And I think it's an important topic to have, an important conversation to have. But I hear time and time again from other creatives, they're like, we weren't really getting paid much for our Flickr photos anyway, so who cares? Some of them want to have their work part of the collective unconscious that AI uses. They're like, actually, if a machine is going to be taking all of human creation and using it, I want to be a part of it. And I'm kind of that too. I'm like, include me too. Don't make a weird deep fake of me, but like, please include my art, like include my podcast. Like, sure, I want to be a part of it. Um, but the more interesting conversation is the one that we're having now. And I think the one that doesn't get talked about enough is the actual creative process, like the actual collaboration with these machines. and the potential that they have. And I see a lot of artists who are just saying, I don't want any AI at all. It's stealing from people, it's replacing, it's soulless. And the way that you're so excited talking about a future that, an AI can connect so intuitively with our actual voice and not replace it, but enhance it, enable it to come out. I think that is a really exciting conversation that just for some reason creatives aren't having. And I think your book is going to help.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for bringing up this critical issue. I feel like we're using a lot of our great energy in a misdirected way. And I believe that companies that stand to benefit from us doing that are behind that. So when we go around and scream endlessly about don't use our data without compensation, we're just helping other companies. We're helping companies that aggregate data who are already selling their catalogs to AI companies, most often paying zero to any creator, right? And even if they were to try to share something with creators, it would be pennies, right? And anyways, this the math doesn't work, and I'm not saying it's a good thing. Don't get that confused. I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's just a fact of what's happening and the way reality is. Now, we can say we don't want AI at all. We can legitimately say that, but we can't say that we want a company to fairly compensate millions of people of the data that it used, right? It's just not possible. And so we're just helping other companies, right? We're like, we hate the AI companies, but we love the data aggregate companies. That's really all this says. But instead, we could be directing our energy to say, don't imitate us without compensating us. That's actually technically feasible. And the AI companies are not doing nearly enough to prevent imitation of specific people. Not nearly enough. There's a little bit of progress, but it's very, very slow because they don't care, right? So that's something we could be fighting a lot harder. And Ronit, the thing that you already shown a light on, which is we can be saying build AI to help instead of replace. There's absolutely no reason that we cannot say that. And from a technical standpoint, from any standpoint, not just how it does it, but what it does is something that needs to be front and center in the way that we're applying our energies to this debate.
Hmm. Yeah, like if I had an AI tool that was like Paint that talks back to me, I would pay a subscription for that. And I think that AI companies need to hear that. We want to enhance our creative spark. We want to have a valuable experience using AI. We don't want to use AI and just feel like we're just ticking the clock closer and closer to us getting replaced with every prompt. Why would we do that? It's like self-sacrifice. I want to use AI that makes me a better creator.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that we can make the argument from a financial standpoint. We are willing to pay them for that, right? I'm also willing to pay for the product that you're describing right there. But also from an ethical standpoint, we're also allowed to say, from an ethical standpoint, that's what we want you to do, and we don't want you building replacive products. And I'm not hearing enough of that. It's almost like we feel helpless. We feel like we can't tell them what to do. We can only say, "Don't take my little piece of art. Don't take my song," right? But there's no reason for that. We are allowed to ask for exactly what we need at every level.
Well, I think that your book, Creative Machines, AI Art and Us, is going to empower a lot of creatives. It is written in a very simple, fun, easy to read way. You bring yourself and your experience into it. You explain the timeline of, how AI was invented and explain like the moment that Transformers came to being, and in a way that made so much more sense to me than anything I have ever read. It's a fun weekend read. Like you could read it on the weekend, and it feels like chicken soup for the AI creative soul.
Oh, thank you.
And absolutely. And I think it's prescriptive. It is not overly overbearing on like what we need to do, but it definitely explains what some of the benefits are to learning about this, what some of the pitfalls are, and like empowers creators to learn about it for themselves and kind of forge a path.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Ronit. I really appreciate that.
Thank you very much for writing this book. Everybody go get it. Creative Machines, AI, Art, and Us. When is it out? Mid-October?
October 14th, but you can pre-order now. Yeah,
Amazing.
available pretty much everywhere, Amazon included.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Maya Ackerman. This has been fantastic.
Thank you so much. It was really a really amazing conversation. Appreciate it, Ronit.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment. It really helps The Grain grow, reaching more creatives across the globe and inviting them to join the conversation. To learn more about The Grain, head to thegrain.ai, and to reach me directly, please send an email to Ronit, that's RONIT, at thegrain.ai. Because we need to start talking about the pleasure and the peril of AI and the future of creativity. And we need to do it now.